The sweet shop stood on the corner of an old street, where time seemed to move more slowly than everywhere else. The signboard was faded, the paint chipped by years of sun and rain, but the glass windows were always clean, always shining. Inside, trays of colorful sweets were arranged with care, jalebi glowing like golden coils, barfi cut into perfect diamonds, gulab jamun resting in syrup like quiet secrets. For me, that shop was not just a place to buy sweets. It was a small pause in my day, a moment of warmth in a life that often felt uncertain. I went there every evening. I was 24 years old, working odd jobs, saving what little I could, and dreaming of something better without knowing what that better really looked like. Life hadn't been cruel, but it hadn't been kind either. It had simply been empty. And then there was him, the old man who owned the sweet shop. His name was Ibrahim. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, I never asked. His hair was silver, neatly combed back, and he always wore clean, simple clothes. His hands were strong but gentle, the hands of someone who had worked his entire life but never lost patience with the world. His eyes were warm, deep, and observant, as if he noticed things about people that they themselves tried to hide. The first time I went into his shop, he smiled at me in a way that felt personal. Not strange, not uncomfortable, just warm. "What will it be today?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. "Half a kilo of barfi," I replied. He packed it carefully, added one extra piece on top, and said nothing about it. I noticed, of course, but I didn't say anything either. Paid, thanked him, and left. The next day I returned. And the next. Soon it became a routine. I would walk down the street in the evening, the sky painted in soft shades of orange and purple, and step into his shop. He would already be watching the door, as if he had been waiting. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. "How was your day?" "Busy." "Did you eat properly?" I tried. Simple conversations. Ordinary words. Yet somehow they stayed with me long after I left the shop. I began to notice small things. The way his smile reached his eyes when he saw me. The way he asked about my work, my health, my mood. The way he never rushed me, even when other customers were waiting. And I noticed something else too. Loneliness. It sat quietly around him, like a shadow he had grown used to. There were no family photos on the walls, no sounds of children, no one calling him from the back room. The shop felt lived in, but not lived with. One evening, when the shop was empty except for us, I asked, "You've been running this place for a long time, haven't you?" "Almost 40 years, he replied. "That's a long time." He smiled softly. "Yes, long enough to see the world change and people disappear." I didn't ask what he meant. Somehow I already knew. Then one week, everything changed. I didn't go to the shop for 2 days. Not because I didn't want to, because I couldn't. Money had been tight before, but now it was gone completely. Rent, food, bills, everything had piled up at once. Buying sweets felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, no matter how small the amount. On the first day, I told myself it didn't matter. On the second day, I felt strangely restless. On the third day, as I walked down the street on my way home, my feet slowed near the corner. I didn't stop. I told myself I wouldn't look, but I did. The lights were on inside the shop. Ibrahim stood behind the counter, his posture straight but his expression different. Tired, worried. As I passed by, pretending not to notice, I heard his voice. "Wait!" I froze. I turned slowly. He had stepped outside the shop, wiping his hands on a cloth. His eyes searched my face, not accusing, not angry, just concerned. "You didn't come for 2 days," he said gently. "Why?" I swallowed. Embarrassment burned in my chest. I didn't have money," I admitted quietly. "So I thought I shouldn't come." For a moment he said nothing. Then he stepped closer. He placed his hand on my shoulder. The touch was light, respectful, yet it sent a strange warmth through me. Something deeper than comfort, something that made my chest tighten. "You should have come anyway," he said softly. I looked up at him, confused. He smiled, but there was emotion in his eyes now. Something raw, something honest. "You are not just a customer to me," he said. "You matter." I didn't know what to say. "I like you very much," he continued, his voice steady but sincere. "I care about you, and I don't want you to stay away because of money." I felt my breath catch. "You can come every day," he said. "Take whatever you want. No payment. Consider it my happiness." I shook my head instinctively. "I can't." He gently squeezed my shoulder. "I insist." There was no pity in his voice, only affection. Something inside me shifted at that moment. A wall I didn't even know I had began to crack. From that day on, I returned to the shop every evening. Sometimes I bought sweets. Sometimes I just sat on the small stool near the counter and talked with him. He made tea for us, poured it carefully, always giving me the warmer cup. People began to notice. "Is he your son?" a customer once asked. Ibrahim smiled politely. "No." He didn't say anything else. But when the customer left, he looked at me and said quietly, "If only life were that simple." I didn't ask him what he meant, because deep down I felt it too. The affection between us was growing, slowly, gently, like something fragile that neither of us dared to name yet. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was in the silences. In the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. In the way I felt calm just sitting near him. In the way his presence made the world feel less heavy. One evening, as I prepared to leave, he said, "Be careful on your way home." "I always am," I replied. He hesitated, then added, "And come tomorrow too." I smiled. "I will." As I walked away, I realized something that scared me more than poverty, more than uncertainty. I was beginning to care for him, not as a shopkeeper, not as a benefactor, but as someone who had quietly entered my heart without asking permission. And somewhere behind me, in the warm light of the sweet shop on the corner, an old man stood watching the door, wondering when love had found him again. So late in life and yet so powerfully. After that night, the sweet shop was no longer just a place on the corner. It became a destination. I found myself planning my day around the evening. Not around work, not around meals, but around the moment when the sun would begin to sink and the streetlights would flicker on, guiding me back to Ibrahim's shop like silent invitations. I told myself it was because of the comfort, because of the tea, because of the warmth. But deep down, I knew better. Every evening, I arrived just as he was finishing arranging the trays. He always noticed me instantly, even if his back was turned. "You're here," he would say, as if confirming something he had already known. "Yes," I replied every time, though it felt unnecessary to say it out loud. He began preparing tea without asking. 2 cups, 1 spoon of sugar in his, 2 in mine. He had noticed my preference without me ever telling him. Sometimes I brought a small stool closer to the counter. Sometimes I stood, leaning against the glass display, watching the reflection of the sweets mix with his image. The shop hummed softly with the sound of the ceiling fan, the occasional customer, and the distant noise of traffic outside. But the moments that stayed with me were the quiet ones. The pauses between words, the shared glances, the comfortable silence that didn't demand explanation. "You seem tired today," he said one evening. I shrugged. Work was long. He studied my face for a moment. "You work too hard for someone your age." I smiled faintly. "Someone has to." He didn't reply, but I saw something cross his face. Concern, perhaps, or regret for a world that demanded too much from young people too soon. Little by little, Ibrahim began to open up. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just in pieces. "I was married once," he told me one night, his eyes fixed on the cup in his hands. "Once?" I asked gently. "She passed away many years ago," he said. "Illness." I didn't interrupt. "We never had children," he continued. At first, it felt like fate was being cruel. Later, it felt like maybe it was protecting someone. I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I felt the weight of those words settle between us. "I stayed busy," he said. "This shop became my life. Work keeps loneliness quiet, you know?" I nodded. I knew exactly what he meant. "What about you?" he asked after a pause. Your family? I hesitated. They exist, I said honestly, but not in the way people imagine when they talk about family. He nodded slowly, as if that was answer enough. That was the night I realized something important. We weren't just passing time together. We were sharing something rare. Understanding. One evening, the shop closed later than usual. The street outside was nearly empty, the air cool and still. As I stood up to leave, Ibrahim reached out instinctively, his hand brushing mine. The contact lasted barely a second. But it was enough. We both froze. He withdrew his hand immediately, his expression changing. Concern, hesitation, fear. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I didn't mean. It's okay, I replied, my heart racing. It really is. But the air between us had changed. Something unspoken now existed, fragile and uncertain. That night, I walked home slower than usual, my thoughts tangled. His hand had been warm, familiar, comforting, and dangerous, because I liked it. Over the next few days, Ibrahim became more careful. His tone remained gentle, his attention unchanged, but his physical distance increased. No casual touches, no instinctive gestures. I noticed, and I missed them. One evening, unable to hold it in anymore, I asked, "Did I do something wrong?" He looked startled. "No. Why would you think that? You've been distant." He sighed, leaning against the counter. "I'm trying to do the right thing." I frowned. The right thing according to whom? He looked at me, then really looked at me. His eyes were tired, conflicted. "You're young," he said quietly. "You have a life ahead of you, dreams, possibilities. And you?" I asked softly. "What do you have?" The question hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Finally, he answered, "Memories." The word hurt more than I expected. "That's not fair," I said. He gave a sad smile. "Life rarely is." One evening, the weather turned suddenly. Rain poured down, heavy and relentless, drenching the street within minutes. Customers stopped coming, and Ibrahim began closing the shop early. "You should wait," he said when he noticed me looking outside. "The rain is strong." "I don't mind," I replied, though I clearly did. He locked the door and turned off half the lights, leaving the shop bathed in a soft, golden glow. We sat there together, listening to the rain hit the roof, the windows fogging slightly from the warmth inside. "This reminds me of something," he said quietly. "What?" "A long time ago, I used to believe moments like this meant something was about to change." "And did it?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Sometimes. Other times they just passed." I looked at him, feeling a sudden courage rise within me. Maybe they only pass if we let them. He didn't reply. Instead, he reached out slowly, hesitantly, and placed his hand over mine on the counter. This time, he didn't pull away. Neither did I. The touch was simple, still, respectful, yet it carried the weight of everything we had been avoiding. "I don't want to hurt you," he said softly. "You're not," I replied. "I don't want to confuse you. You're not doing that either." He studied my face, searching for doubt, finding none. "You matter to me," he said, his voice barely above the sound of rain. "So do you," I answered. For the first time, he smiled without fear. That night, nothing dramatic happened. No promises, no declarations, just understanding. From that day on, our bond grew more open. Still careful, still gentle, but no longer afraid of itself. He walked me to the door when I left. I stayed a little longer each evening. Our conversations deepened. And slowly, without either of us saying it out loud, we accepted a truth that had already settled into our hearts. This was no longer just kindness. It was affection. It was care. It was love. Quiet, patient, and strong enough to wait. After the night of rain, something settled between us. Not peace exactly, not certainty either. It was an awareness, a shared understanding that whatever existed between Ibrahim and me could no longer be ignored, but still could not be rushed. And so we moved forward slowly, carefully, like two people walking across thin glass, aware that one wrong step could shatter everything. The shop felt different now. Not in any visible way. The trays were still aligned, the air still sweet with sugar and cardamom, the old fan still creaked softly overhead. But the atmosphere between us had shifted. Ibrahim smiled more often, though his smiles carried thought behind them now. He listened with deeper attention. When our eyes met, neither of us looked away as quickly as before. There was comfort in that. There was also restraint. He never crossed boundaries. Neither did I. But every evening, when I stepped into the shop, I felt a quiet happiness bloom in my chest. Something steady and reassuring. "You look lighter these days," he said one evening as he handed me tea. "Do I?" I asked. "Yes," he replied, "as if something heavy has been set down." I smiled. "Maybe it has." He nodded, as if he understood exactly what I meant. One night, as the shop grew quiet, Ibrahim surprised me by saying, "Would you like to see the back room?" I looked up. "The kitchen." He hesitated, then nodded. "And more." Curious, I followed him behind the counter. The back room was small but tidy. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars of sugar, flour, nuts, and spices. A narrow table stood in the corner, stained with years of careful work. And beyond that, through a simple wooden door, was another space. His space. A modest living area. A bed neatly made. A small bookshelf. A single framed photograph on the wall, him, younger, standing beside a woman with kind eyes. "My wife," he said quietly when he noticed my gaze. "She was beautiful," I said honestly. "She was," he agreed. "And strong." He sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking older than usual. After she passed, I never changed much. I didn't know how. I sat on the chair nearby, unsure if I should speak. "You're the first person I've brought back here in years," he added. The weight of that statement settled over me. "I'm honored," I said softly. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with something gentle and grateful. "I trust you." A question of distance. As days turned into weeks, our bond deepened, but so did Ibrahim's internal struggle. One evening, after a particularly long silence, he said, "People talk." I frowned. "About what?" "About us," he said simply. I felt my stomach tighten. "What do they say?" "Nothing specific," he replied. But they notice how often you're here, how we sit, how we speak." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Does it bother you?" He took a long breath. "It worries me." "Because of me?" I asked. "No," he said firmly. "Because of the world." I nodded slowly. I knew what he meant. "You deserve a life without whispers," he continued, "without people questioning your choices. And you deserve happiness," I said quietly. He looked away. "Sometimes those things don't come together." The words stung, but I didn't argue, because I feared they might be true. A moment of separation. The next day I didn't go to the shop. Not because I didn't want to, because I needed to think. I walked the streets, trying to understand what I felt. This wasn't infatuation. It wasn't confusion. It was affection, deep, steady, sincere. But it came with weight. Was I willing to carry that weight? That night, I lay awake, replaying his voice in my mind. His kindness, his patience, his quiet way of caring. By morning, my decision was clear. That evening, I walked back to the shop. Ibrahim looked up sharply when he saw me, relief flashing across his face before he could hide it. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted. "I wasn't sure either," I replied honestly. He waited. "I've been thinking," I said, "about us." His shoulders tensed. "And?" he asked softly. "I don't know what the future looks like," I continued. "But I know this. I don't want to disappear just because things are difficult." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again. "I don't want you to sacrifice yourself," he said. "I'm not," I replied. "I'm choosing." The distinction mattered. The unspoken promise. That night, after closing the shop, we stood outside together. The street was quiet, the sky clear and dark. "I won't rush you," I said. "And I won't pressure you." He nodded. "And I won't push you away out of fear." We stood there, side by side, not touching, but closer than ever. No promises were spoken, but something stronger than words passed between us. Commitment. Days passed. Our connection matured into something calm and grounded. We laughed more freely, shared stories, disagreed sometimes, but always with respect. One evening, as I prepared to leave, Ibrahim said, "You've changed my days." I looked at him. "So have you." He smiled, eyes shining. "I thought love was behind me." I stepped closer. "Maybe love doesn't follow age." He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. As I walked home that night, I realized something profound. This wasn't a love built on fantasy. It wasn't rushed or reckless. It was built on presence, on listening, on choosing to stay. And for the first time in a long while, I felt certain of one thing. Whatever came next, judgment, challenges, uncertainty, I wouldn't face it alone. A customer lingering a little too long. A neighbor pausing outside the shop window. A question asked twice when once would have been enough. "Your young friend hasn't come today?" "He comes every evening, doesn't he?" The words were casual, but the curiosity behind them was not. Ibrahim never answered more than necessary. He smiled, nodded, returned to his work. But I saw it in his eyes, the tension, the careful calculations, the fear that something fragile might be exposed before it had fully learned how to protect itself. One evening, as I sat near the counter, a man about my age walked in and glanced at me openly before ordering sweets. "You work here?" he asked me casually. "No," I replied. He looked between Ibrahim and me. "Friend." Ibrahim answered before I could. "Yes." The word echoed inside me. Friend. True but incomplete. The man shrugged and left, but the silence he left behind felt heavier than before. The conversation we avoided. That night, after the shop closed, Ibrahim didn't speak for a long time. "You're thinking too loudly," I finally said. He smiled faintly. "You're learning me too well." "Talk to me," I said gently. He leaned against the counter, eyes tired. "I've lived quietly for many years. I didn't mind being invisible. But now, I worry my life might start being discussed." "Because of me," I said. "Because of us," he corrected. The distinction mattered. "I don't regret you," he continued. "I regret the world that makes people afraid of tenderness." I stepped closer. "Then don't let it decide for us." He looked at me with a mix of admiration and sadness. "You're braver than I was at your age. Or maybe I've learned from watching you," I replied. That made him smile, truly smile. An unexpected distance. A few days later, Ibrahim surprised me by closing the shop early. "I need a few days," he said carefully, "to think." My heart tightened, but I didn't argue. "I'll still come by," I said. "No," he replied gently. "Give me this space." I nodded, though every part of me resisted. "I'm not leaving," I added quietly. "I know," he said. For 3 evenings, the corner felt empty. I walked past the shop, lights off, shutters closed, and felt an ache I hadn't expected. Without our conversations, the world felt louder and less kind. I wondered if this was the beginning of an ending. His return. On the 4th evening, the lights were back on. The smell of sugar and cardamom drifted into the street. I didn't hesitate. When I entered, Ibrahim looked up, and something in his expression softened immediately. "I was hoping you'd come," he said. I exhaled. "I always would." He gestured for me to sit. "I needed to be sure of myself." "And?" I asked. "And I realized something," he said. "I've spent too many years living cautiously, protecting myself from pain by avoiding joy." I listened, my heart steady but alert. "I don't want to do that anymore," he finished. I didn't smile. I didn't rush him. I simply said, "Then don't." That night, as we closed the shop together, Ibrahim stopped near the door. "There's something I need to ask," he said. I waited. "If at any point you feel burdened," he continued, "or if this begins to cost you more than it gives, Promise me you'll walk away. I stepped closer. Only if you promise not to decide for me. He considered that. Then he nodded. Agreed. For the first time he reached out. Not instinctively, not accidentally, but deliberately. He placed his hand over mine. This time it stayed there. Not claiming. Not demanding. Just present. My fingers tightened slightly in response. And in that simple, quiet gesture, we crossed a line neither of us had named before. A new understanding. From that moment things changed. Not outwardly, no grand gestures, no public declarations. But inwardly something settled. We belonged, if not to each other in the way the world defines belonging, then in a way that felt just as real. He began to walk me part of the way home. I began to help more in the shop, small tasks, shared work. We laughed more openly. One evening, as we sat on stools behind the counter, Ibrahim said, I used to think love had an age limit. And now? I asked. And now I think it only has courage requirements, he replied. The cost of choice. Still, not everything was easy. I lost one of my jobs unexpectedly. Money tightened again. Stress returned. One night, overwhelmed, I snapped at Ibrahim without meaning to. I don't know what I'm doing, I said sharply. Maybe this is a mistake. The hurt in his eyes was immediate, but he didn't raise his voice. Then let's pause, he said calmly. Not break, just pause. I took a breath, guilt flooding me. I didn't mean. I know, he interrupted gently. Fear speaks loudly when it feels cornered. His patience undid me. I'm scared, I admitted. So am I, he replied. We sat in silence, hands not touching this time, but still close enough to feel each other's presence. A quiet strength. Later that night, as I prepared to leave, Ibrahim said, Whatever happens, I'm grateful. For what? I asked. For reminding me that my heart still works, he said simply. I looked at him then. Not as an old man, not as a shopkeeper, but as someone brave enough to love despite knowing the risks. And I realized something. Love wasn't making our lives easier. It was making them truer. As I walked home under the dim streetlights, I felt the weight of the world pressing in, but also felt something else beneath it. Strength. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that grows when two people choose honesty over safety, connection over isolation. And somewhere behind me, in a sweet shop glowing softly against the dark, an old man stood no longer afraid of being seen. What the heart refuses to forget. Some loves grow loudly. Ours grew quietly, and that made the silence unbearable when it was threatened. Days of unease. After the night of tension, nothing was openly wrong. And yet, everything felt delicate. Ibrahim continued opening the shop every morning. I continued coming every evening. We spoke, we smiled, we shared tea. But beneath it all ran an undercurrent of worry, like a crack in glass that hadn't yet spread but was impossible to ignore. I was searching for work again. Rejections piled up. Every unanswered call felt heavier than the last. One evening, as I sat watching Ibrahim arrange sweets, I realized something that frightened me. I was depending on him, not for money, not for shelter, but for steadiness. And I wondered if that was fair. A difficult decision. The thought followed me for days, until one night, I said the words I had been dreading. I think I should stop coming for a while. Ibrahim's hands stilled. For how long? He asked carefully. I don't know, I replied. Until I get my life together. He nodded slowly, but I could see the pain he was trying to hide. If that's what you need, he said, I'll respect it. I wanted him to argue. He didn't. That hurt more than I expected. Learning to be apart. The first evening without the shop felt strange. The second felt empty. By the third, the street itself felt wrong, as if something essential had been removed. I focused on job applications, on interviews, on anything that kept my mind occupied. But at night, my thoughts returned to Ibrahim. I wondered if he missed me. I wondered if he was relieved. I wondered if he thought I'd made the right choice. Weeks passed. I found work. Temporary, exhausting, but enough to survive. and still something was missing. Ibrahim's silence. What I didn't know, what I couldn't see, was how quiet the shop had become without me. Ibrahim continued his routine, but his smiles came slower. The tea tasted bitter to him now. Customers noticed the change. "You seem tired," one said. He nodded. "I am." At night, he sat alone in the back room, staring at the empty chair where I used to sit. He told himself this was for the best, that love sometimes meant letting go. But his heart refused to accept the logic. The unplanned meeting. One evening, as I walked home from work, tired and distracted, I turned a corner and nearly collided with him. Ibrahim, out of the shop, out of routine. He looked just as surprised as I felt. "I didn't know you walked this way," he said. "I don't usually," I replied. We stood there, unsure what to do with the moment fate had handed us. "You look well," he said finally. "So do you," I lied. There was so much to say, and none of it felt safe. "I should go," I added. He nodded, but before I could step away, he said quietly, "I miss you." The words stopped me cold. I turned back. "I miss you too," I admitted, speaking the truth. We sat on a bench nearby, the city humming around us. "I thought leaving would make things clearer," I said. But all it did was make everything louder inside my head. He smiled sadly. "I hoped distance would protect you." "From what?" I asked. "From choosing something difficult," he replied. I looked at him then, really looked. "You don't feel like a mistake," I said. "You feel like honesty." Something broke open in his expression. "I never wanted to be your burden," he said. "You're not," I replied. "But I was afraid of becoming yours." He shook his head. "You never were." That night we walked together, slowly, quietly. No promises yet. No decisions declared. Just presence. When we reached his shop, he stopped. "You can come back," he said. "Not because you owe me anything. Only if you want to." I felt a calm settle over me. "I want to," I said. He nodded, relief washing over his face. The shop felt familiar again, but different. Not because we had reset, because we had chosen. I sat on the stool. He poured tea. No words were needed. Sometimes love doesn't need certainty. Sometimes it just needs return. From then on, we were more honest. About fears, about limits, about hopes. We talked about the future, not in plans, but in possibilities. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was borrowing happiness. I felt like I was building it, ending the night. As I left the shop that evening, Ibrahim said, "Whatever happens next, we face it awake." I smiled. "Together." He nodded. "Together." And under the quiet glow of the streetlight, I understood something simple and powerful. Love wasn't about never leaving. It was about knowing where and who you return to. When I returned to the sweet shop for good, it didn't feel like going back. It felt like arriving somewhere new, with memory in its walls and possibility in its air. A different kind of beginning. We didn't speak about rules, but we understood them. Honesty first. No illusions. No rescuing each other from lives we still had to live. I worked long hours now. Some days I arrived at the shop exhausted, my shoulders heavy with effort and responsibility. Ibrahim never asked for explanations. He simply noticed. "You should sit," he said one evening, gently guiding me toward the stool. "You're carrying today on your back." I smiled tiredly. "I'm learning how." "That's good," he replied. "Carrying is part of becoming." I realized then that he never tried to hold me still. He wanted me to grow. The world, however, does not always reward quiet love. A woman from the neighborhood approached me one afternoon while Ibrahim was in the back. "You spend a lot of time here," she said casually. "Yes," I replied. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp. "People talk." "I know," I said. She seemed surprised by my calm. "Doesn't that worry you?" I thought for a moment. It used to. She didn't know what to say to that. When she left, Ibrahim came back out, concern etched on his face. "I heard voices," he said. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I replied. I'm learning not to disappear. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. That takes courage, he said quietly. One night, long after the shop had closed, Ibrahim sat more heavily than usual. Some days, he said slowly, I feel every year I've lived. I turned toward him. Does that frighten you? No, he replied. It humbles me. He paused. I worry about time, he admitted. Not running out, but becoming unfair. I understood what he meant. You don't owe me youth, I said softly. And you don't owe me certainty, he replied. We sat in silence, sharing the truth without trying to fix it. One evening, Ibrahim handed me a small key. For the shop, he said. I stared at it. Are you sure? I am, he replied. You're already here. This just acknowledges it. I felt something tighten in my chest. Thank you, I said. He smiled. It's not permission. It's trust. From that day on, the shop felt different. Not like a place I visited. Like a place I belonged. The quiet resistance. Not everyone approved. A supplier hinted that Ibrahim should be careful. A distant relative suggested selling the shop. A customer stopped coming altogether. Ibrahim listened. He nodded. He continued. I've lived long enough to know, he told me one night, that approval is a poor replacement for peace. I admired him deeply in that moment. A moment of fear. One night, after closing, Ibrahim felt unwell. Just dizziness, he insisted. But fear flooded me before logic could catch up. I sat beside him, my voice steady despite the panic inside. You're not alone, I said. He smiled weakly. I know. That's why I'm calm. He recovered quickly. But something had shifted. I had seen my fear clearly now, and I didn't run from it, choosing public truth. Weeks later, a customer jokingly said, You two run this place like family. Ibrahim glanced at me. Then he said calmly, We are. No explanation. No defense. Just truth. Something in my chest loosened. A shared future defined gently. We didn't talk about forever. We talked about tomorrow. About rest. About balance. About keeping the shop alive without letting it consume us. You could study, Ibrahim suggested once. Or learn another skill. And you? I asked. I could finally take a day off, he smiled. The strength of staying. One evening, as I locked up the shop with my key, I realized something profound. Love had not rescued either of us. It had simply given us somewhere safe to stand while we rescued ourselves. Ending the day. As we walked home together, Ibrahim said, Whatever the world calls this, I know what it is to me. What? I asked. He stopped under the streetlight, looking older and stronger at once. Home, he said. And for the first time, I didn't question whether I deserved that word. I accepted the sweetness that remains. Some stories do not end with grand declarations. They end with doors left open, with lights kept on, with someone waiting without fear, time moving gently. Years do not always announce themselves loudly. They passed for us in small ways. In the shop, the trays were rearranged more carefully. Ibrahim took fewer late nights, trusting me with closing more often. I learned the rhythm of the work, not just the recipes, but the patience behind them. Sugar, he taught me, must never be rushed. Neither must love. Customers came and went. Some returned after long absences. Some never did. New faces appeared, young couples, children tugging at their parents' sleeves, old men who sat quietly and drank tea without speaking. Life continued. So did we. A quiet legacy. One evening, Ibrahim handed me a notebook. These are the recipes, he said. Some written. Some remembered. I flipped through the pages, stunned by the careful handwriting, the notes in the margins. You're giving this to me? I asked. I'm sharing it, he corrected, with someone who respects it. I understood then. This wasn't about ownership. It was about trust. The shop changes hands, not hearts. Eventually, the neighborhood accepted what it could not change. We weren't loud. We weren't defensive. We were consistent. And consistency over time becomes undeniable. When Ibrahim finally decided to step back from daily work, it wasn't dramatic. There was no announcement, just a gradual shift. I opened the shop more often. He came later, sometimes not at all. But he was always there, in advice, in presence, in the quiet pride he carried when he watched me work. "You've made it your own," he said once. "No," I replied. "I've made it ours." Facing the inevitable. Age does not ask permission. Ibrahim slowed. Some mornings were harder than others. Some days he stayed home. I learned to listen more carefully, to his breathing, to his silences. One night, as we sat together in the back room, he said calmly, "One day, you'll lock the shop without me." My throat tightened. "Don't." He smiled gently. "Not yet, but one day." I didn't argue. Love isn't denial. It's presence. What remains? When that day eventually came, it wasn't loud. There were no crowds, no speeches, just a quiet room, a still hand, and a life that had been fully lived. Grief came, but it wasn't empty. It was full of evenings, of tea shared, of words spoken honestly, of love that had been chosen again and again. Carrying forward. The shop remained open. I kept the sign the same, the recipes unchanged. Customers asked sometimes, "Where is the old man?" I smiled and said, "Still here." And he was. In the warmth of the lights, in the sweetness of the air, in the way I treated every person who walked through the door, with patience, with care, with dignity. I learned something from loving him. Love does not need approval to be real. It does not need permanence to matter. It only needs truth. And ours had been true. The final evening. One evening, years later, as I closed the shop and turned off the lights, I stood for a moment in the doorway. The street was quiet, the sky familiar, and I realized I was not alone. Because love, when it is real, does not end. It changes form. It becomes guidance. It becomes home. I locked the door gently and walked forward, carrying sweetness with me.